Welcome to the Make It Happen podcast. My name is Melanie Moreno. I am a blogger, a content creator, a health coach, and most importantly, I will be your host. Join me for some fun and inspiring conversations with amazing individuals coming up now. Hello. If today is your first time listening in, then thank you so much for being here. And if you've been following along since the beginning, then this is probably a little bit bittersweet because today is the season finale of the Make It Happen podcast. I mentioned we were approaching a close last week, and I feel quite sad saying that. These podcasts have been a big part of my life for several months, and that's by no means an exaggeration because I really pushed aside a lot of everything else to work on this. I don't regret it one bit. I've learned so much about myself through the process in terms of my needs and my abilities, time management, and of course I've also learned so much from my beautiful guests. Literally, a big part of my life in recent time has been this podcast, and it has given me insight into what it means to use my voice. Besides giving myself a platform, there is also something really cool about the way this interview-style podcast structure that I've been doing gives me the chance to shine a light on other people who are doing, thinking, or living in really interesting ways. And it feels so special that I can share that. In today's episode, we actually talk about the behind the scenes of the podcast and creative work in general. I'm really excited to introduce you guys to a dear friend of mine, Donovan. She is an artist and traveler, but beyond that, she is full of stories and insight from exploring different avenues and giving herself the chance to grow and understand herself personally. Morgan and I internet met a few years back, but bonded right away over our love for plant-based food and cooking. If someone needs to open a restaurant, it's her. To this day, I still make a lentil, carrot, and radish salad that she once posted about. Oh my gosh, yeah, she's incredible. However, despite our foodie interests, what we really talk a lot about in this episode are her travels and what she discovered about herself while doing that. She had just gotten divorced from someone who she was in a relationship with for much of her young adult life, and she took off to figure out what it is she really wanted and who she was. I think it's so adventurous of her and so wild, and Morgan tells us what her favorite places are that she visited, her tips for making travel feasible, what it was like being a solo female traveler, and how she met her current boyfriend along the way. It's such a cute story. You guys definitely want to listen through for this. Today's episode is also for you if you've ever struggled with self-worth, standing up for yourself, or maintaining independence in a partnership. I hope you guys like these long episodes because today's might be the longest one yet. I'm not sure. The nutrition episode with Alex was also a bit long, but the longer an episode is, the more stories, information, and value you get out of it. So, okay, well, I can't vouch for anyone else's, but at least in the Make It Happen podcast, that's how we roll. So, buckle up and let's get into this fun conversation with Morgan Donovan. If you guys know me, you know that I'm a little bit of a supplement junkie. I like trying out new supplements to meet the changing needs of my body, and that varies from month to month. I look at supplements as a tool to give me a boost in certain areas I need a little bit of help, and sometimes I don't stick with them. So if you look in my supplement cabinet, I have bottles of halfway used vitamins and powders. It's ridiculous. So I have the solution, Care of. Care of is a company that makes taking supplements fun and easy. First, what you do is take a quiz on their website to see what your personalized needs are. Care of makes a month's supply of your custom-made vitamin pack and then mails them out to you. They also have everything from vitamins and minerals to medicinal herbs to protein powders. The packs not only keep all of your vitamins in one convenient place, but they are made from biodegradable materials and are printed with cute messages. Sometimes there's a little motivational quote or a thought-provoking question on the front. It makes me look forward to taking my daily vitamins. Plus, there's no waste, so you don't get stuck with bottles of supplements that you're not going to want in a month or two. And you have the freedom to change up your monthly order anytime you want. So if you'd like to add some fun and convenience to taking your vitamins, then be sure to check out Care Of. You can go to takecareof.com or follow the link in the show notes of this episode to score $40 off of your first Care Of delivery. If you give Care Of a try, definitely send me a picture and let me know what you think. Like whenever you've worked on something, since you're a creative person too, do you ever feel like you just want to keep doing the thing you're doing? You're like, oh, I should, add a finishing touch here, or I could always do more on this. And then it becomes hard to stop. You're like, okay, but I'm also really tired.
Yeah.
Or I haven't eaten, and those sort of things.
Totally. Yeah, it happens a lot. Like, I studied photography, and when I used to spend so many hours in the dark room. Like, I'd be there late at night, and like, yeah, I just kept working, trying to perfect things. And like, even with like teaching art last semester, I was just talking to my partner about this. It was like kind of like all consuming. Like, I'd like dream about it, and I would like just be talking about it all the time, and like all of my like brain energy was always going to like that because I was excited about it.
Are you doing that again? Are you going to teach art again this semester?
No, I'm just filling in as a substitute teacher this year. It was kind of a temporary thing because that teacher had like a medical emergency. So, and I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. So they had me fill in. But yeah, I'll just be filling in as a kind of a sub teacher this year. But
like on as needed days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, less stressful.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I'm so proud of you though. I can't imagine. It's like learning all of the new technology and the recording, and then even like the interviews themselves probably take a while, and the editing time, and it's just, I can't imagine.
Well, I guess you've just really gotta want to do something.
Yeah.
And then it becomes okay. Like, I was saying on the idea for a while, since last year I had been thinking of it, and I thought, oh, but I don't really know how to conduct an interview. And then I thought, oh, but I don't have the equipment for it.
Yeah.
Oh, but like, I don't know anyone who would co-host with me, and all these like little blocks. And then slowly I was like, okay, I don't need that. I can do it myself.
Yeah.
Kind of just taught myself, basically.
That's so cool.
Thanks.
Oh, that's really awesome.
So I want to let you know that the recording is now started.
Okay.
I'm very excited to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm excited too.
It's been a while. I mean, we've known each other through Instagram for a couple of years, through, I think it was the commonality of us both posting foodie stuff and bonding over that. And I remember when you were at the inn and you had a garden and you were posting all these recipes that you'd make, you with your green thumb, like growing these beautiful things and then cooking up masterpieces. Remember that?
Oh, thanks. It's fun. Yeah, no, it's wild to see you like and talk to you in person, because not only did we connect through Instagram, but we were kind of pen pals for a minute.
Yeah.
Earlier in the year or last year, which is so unique now to like be able to write someone real letters and everything. So that was really cool. We've never like talked like this, so it's really fun. Yeah.
So you probably told me in a letter or on Instagram a little bit, but would you mind kind of diving into what your upbringing was like? I would like to know, like back when you lived in Utah, like what was that life like? I know you live in Canada now, so This was probably like a whole nother lifetime, just even talking about that.
Yeah, when I first moved to Utah, I was really young, like 7, so just like starting school age. And I was homeschooled for like a few years of elementary school. So I always make jokes about it now, because starting school after being homeschooled, like you really are kind of socially behind. So, because I did have like a couple of neighborhood friends and things when I was being homeschooled, but it's not the same as like working in a classroom environment with a lot of peers. So definitely when I started school, I felt like kind of socially behind. I don't know. So yeah, I grew up homeschooled when I was younger, and that I think definitely impacted probably my creativity and things like that, because it was a really loose homeschool schedule. So I was like kind of free to do the schoolwork kind of as I felt like it throughout the day. So I would be outside, I would be kind of really active and like fluid in my learning. So I think that's probably impacted my creativity a lot, and is something that I kind of bring into the classroom with the kids too. But yeah, and then I started school. I had I think after that, a pretty normal upbringing. I was kind of a minority in Utah because I didn't grow up Mormon, which is a dominant religion there. So probably one of the only white people that could say they felt like kind of what it felt like to grow up in a minority, I guess. I don't know, because there were definite, like, it's a very like close knit religion and community, and so I definitely was aware of like being outside of that, I guess. Yeah, I guess I went from social outsideness of homeschooling to being like in a minority with religion. But it was a beautiful upbringing though, and that like Utah is very beautiful. We've talked about this before, about like it being super natural, tons of opportunities to be hiking and skiing and be outdoors. And yeah, other than not being maybe part of the majority, I feel so lucky to have grown up there, because it's a really well run, beautiful community and state. And yeah.
Okay, can you kind of describe what creativity means to you and what those outlets were for you growing up and how you started those?
Yeah, totally. So creativity to me has changed a lot, because it was kind of, for me, it was like that really fluid. It could be kind of everything. And then I went to art school, 5 years at university studying art. And for a while, it shifted to like this very, like, I don't know, almost like an uptight, like, kind of there's this art world, and it's about like society and who you know and being part of like the scene and stuff like that. And it kind of shifted to that for me for a little while, just because there were people who took it really seriously that way at the school. And so I felt like to kind of fit into that, I had to kind of like see it that way, I guess. But since then, it has definitely shifted back more towards just being something that is, it can be expressed in any aspect of life, right? Like you and I specifically, I think, do it through our food a lot of the time. Not like treating food as something that's not just for nourishing us, but that is like an expression of, I don't know, like appreciating nature and creating something beautiful from it, something that's not just about like, oh, I have to feed myself, but it's like I'm taking delight in this like process and this beautiful thing that I've created. And, you know, so I think it's present in anything we do, like your podcast, like any project can be an act of creativity. You know, and so I see it more like that now, and I definitely lived that more as a kid, and I hope I'm getting back to that now too. Like I do feel like kids are like the most creative, and I remember like always having a project going. And like what you said about spending all your time on things, like I was like the kid who was going door to door like, hey, I made these like little Halloween ghosts. Do you want to buy some decorations for your house? Like I was like always making stuff and like had ventures and stuff like that. So yeah, creativity has meant a lot of different things to me in the last while, but I'm definitely coming back more around toward how it was when I was a kid.
I sense also like a self a self-starter or a go-getter sort of attitude in you. I mean, going door to door to sell little handmade ghosts, that sounds like you're, 7-year-old businesswoman or something. So,
Yeah.
like, how did that then, like, how do you think that branched into everything else that you've, like, gone about? I feel like, let's see, how do I put this into words? One of the first things about you that attracted me. There we go. One of the first things about you that attracted me was that you seemed like you really knew who you were, and you had these interests that you showcased a little bit through Instagram, and also the travel adventures that you would go on, and you had your photography. Like, it felt like you had your life together.
No.
And you had a good rotation of creative passions in there too. And I think that was what was most appealing. So how do you cultivate that? I mean, am I misinterpreting it? If you kind of see it differently, like, feel free to interject.
Yeah. Well, first, that's like the biggest compliment ever because trying to like cultivate that, I guess, like self-assurance or kind of like knowing who I was is something that's been really intentional for me in the last few years. And so to hear, like, I mean, obviously, like, Instagram and social media will always kind of give a picture of people's lives being really together, right? So, I mean, given that part of it's maybe just because I'm showing what I'm showing, but at the same time, I do hope that I give off that kind of vibe because it's something that I have really tried to like achieve for myself. And so, like, yes, I will say part of it is probably like the whole social media thing, but I'm also going to own, hopefully, I'm going to try to own the part of it that I know I've tried to like find for myself. So it's a huge compliment to me that you get that from me. I really appreciate it because it is something. You mentioned travel. Travel was one of like the major ways that I tried to achieve that kind of like self assurance. It's something that I knew I'd wanted to do since I was young, and I definitely got into a space after graduating university where I didn't really know what was next for me or who I was or what I wanted, and travel was kind of the tool that I used to figure that out, I guess, because I was like, if I can go somewhere and I can be by myself and take care of myself and make all of these decisions by myself for months on end, then I will know that I'm, I guess, strong and capable. And I don't know, I just wanted to know that I was someone who was comfortable being by themselves or alone with themselves for a long time and could take care of, I keep saying themselves, myself, could be with myself for a long time, was confident in myself and could take care of myself. And travel was kind of the thing that showed me I could do those things, I guess. We spent a lot of time by yourselves and by yourself when you know, are traveling like that, and you have to kind of get yourself out of sticky situations sometimes. And so it was just I think that was kind of where I grew a lot into who I am, and I'm really glad that it worked. Yeah.
So, like, after university, you felt like you needed to do something where you would just spend time with yourself. Did you not really have that growing up, or were you like someone who was always surrounded by people? Like, you just didn't really, you felt like you didn't have yourself figured out, or what was that?
Yeah, so this is something that's not very well known on my social media, but I actually got married really young. I don't think that's something that you know about me at all. You know, it's really common where I grew up to get married really young. So 2 years after high school, I got married to the person that I was with like since high school, like since the middle of high school. I mean, I won't like go a ton into it just because, you know, there's always other people involved, but there was a part of me that felt like I was kind of letting down the younger version of me that did have all these kind of aspirations of travel and things like that. And I think that just because it was kind of the environment I grew up in and it seemed the easier step because I needed somewhere to live and things like that, I just kind of like, you know, and he was a good person and I was like, okay, let's kind of go for it. But in some ways I did know that I was kind of giving up on or like kind of shutting out some of those dreams that younger me had had. And it just got to the point after graduating university and a lot of my like feelings of success being tied up in university too and like achieving things that I kind of was looking at my life and I was like, well, what does success mean to me now? You know, making plans with another person that didn't really necessarily reflect what my goals had always been or who I was inside. I kind of saw my life going in a direction that didn't really reflect me or who I was. And I did feel that because I went like straight from high school to living in a university dorm to living with a husband that I never actually did figure out like who I was or have the time alone. You know, it's like I'd gone from a high school relationship to being surrounded by other college students to being in a serious relationship. Like I just didn't have the experience as a young adult to like figure things out by myself kind of thing. So yeah, it just we reached a point where it was like we weren't able to kind of be who we were together. And so we split up and I went and I did these things that I was hoping would kind of show me who I was, or at least let me kind of tap into who I was before I like kind of lost my way a bit, maybe.
That sounds like a scary position to be in where you just kind of catch yourself one day and you're like, oh, this isn't where I want my life to be going. Who am I?
Oh, terrifying, especially when there are other people involved, right? Like, it's like, you know, it's scary enough on your own to say, I have to make some big changes. But when you know that those big changes are going to impact other people, it's like so much worse. But I just wasn't going to survive internally, like going down the path I was going. So you just do what you have to do.
Did you know at that point when you were breaking things off that you wanted to travel, or okay, so how'd that come into your mind, like the idea of traveling, and how'd you make that happen? Like, did you ever, when you were younger, you said that you had some dreams that you hadn't yet accomplished? Like, did you have this savings account where you were just like, okay, one day when I get travel, or like, how'd you make this happen? How'd you do it?
Yeah. Yeah, so definitely like there was a pull to travel even when I was young. Like I just remember being a kid and like having these like really intense feelings that like there was so much beyond this like little town I was growing up in, and feeling like these just like intense longing, like my chest would just be like in pain because it was just like this intense longing for what I had no idea, but I knew that there was like all this life and culture and stuff beyond the little bubble that I was experiencing, and I just wanted to experience it so badly. And I don't really know where it came from or like why I had that feeling that there was like so much else out there, but it was there. And I was so lucky that my mom really kind of fostered it in me because I got nominated for like a student kind of exchange thing. I was only 13, and she really kind of was the one that pushed me into like doing it. She got me all this fundraising material. I mean, talk about the going door to door and selling stuff. It's like I had a lot of practice. Yeah, so I was doing that again as a kid, like to do these student trips. So I got to do 2 of those when I was 13 and 14, 2 different summers, and that just like fueled what was already there. Because it's like once you get the chance to travel, it's like your list just gets longer the more places you see, right? Because you experience this little pocket and then you want to go to the next place and the next place. And so going as a teenager just fueled the fire that was already there. And it was something that I knew I just wanted to spend the time doing. And I'd read travel blogs, I would do all of that. And as far as making it happen, I've thought about this question because I knew we were going to talk about it. And it's, I mean,
of course, like, in case I haven't clarified, I should probably say, now that we're 20 minutes into the conversation, I should say, hi, Morgan. Thank you so much for coming on the Make It Happen podcast.
Hopefully you can move that.
I'll just move it to the front.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, yeah, so I knew we were going to talk about it. I do want to say, like, first that I, like, absolutely recognize that I'm, like, in a privileged position, right? Because I'm going to get you some tips, give your listeners some tips about things that I did to make travel happen, but I also want to acknowledge that, I mean, I had scholarships to university, so the money that I made working, I could save, and I wasn't, deep in student loans. Like, I had a privileged upbringing. So I know that I'm starting from a place of, like, being able to make saving for travel a priority. And I do want to acknowledge that because I know that it's not necessarily possible for everyone, or some people don't have money left over from paying bills and things like that. So that's something that's important for me to acknowledge because, I just want to recognize where I've come from. But as far as things that I did to make it happen and things that I think that everyone can do to make it happen, if that's a goal for them, is, to make it a priority. One, like, we do have our things that we spend money on, and I've had people tell me, oh, I wish I could, like, travel like that, and meanwhile, like, coworkers and stuff, and meanwhile they're eating out every day or something like that, it's like, or they're wearing, like, Beats headphones or, like, something like that. And it's like, for those years where traveling was my priority, like, I did not eat out, I did not buy new things, new clothes, new stuff like that, because that's just, like, I was driving a 20-year-old car, travel was the priority for me. And so when I was working and saving, like, that's where the money I was saving was going. And then, like, once you're there, there's so much you can do to make, like, the most of a trip, right? Like, in some places that I knew I wanted to stay for a longer period of time, I did, like, work exchange kind of things. So, like, I knew I wanted to stay in Italy for a while and experience the food and the art. So I found like an olive farm in Tuscany, and I worked on the olive farm during harvest for like 3 weeks. Yeah, because it's like they just covered my room and board, which is like the food and a place to stay are the most expensive parts of travel. So it's like they paid for all that. I just picked olives for a few hours, a few days a week, and then the rest of the time I was taking buses to the city and exploring. And so,
on a side note, is that how olives are actually, like, they're hand harvested? Is that for real?
No.
Oh.
No. Yeah, I know. I learned this too because I thought I was going to be hand harvesting, but just a little on the Make It Happen podcast, you can learn about harvesting olives. It was like these, we would like unroll nets down the lengths of the rows of olive trees and like pin them around the trees. So there's like nets covering the whole ground. And then you have these like air pressured like clappers, we'd call them. They're kind of like 2 rakes on the end of a long pole, and they would just vibrate and like clap together. And we were basically like brushing the trees with them. So you've just got this kind of mechanical rake thing, and you're brushing the the branches and all the olives are falling down onto the net on the ground below you, and then you just like roll them down the net into crates and stuff. So yeah,
that's fascinating.
So that's how olives are harvested. At least those were organic. So I think that they have like big machines for the other ones, but these were all just like by hand with the clapper things.
That's cool.
Yeah. So I did things like that, which is also, I mean, like not only are you saving money, but you're getting a like deep cultural experience, right? Like you're like I was living on an Italian farm harvesting the olives for olive oil, which goes all over the world. So it's beneficial two ways. It makes your travel money go so much farther, and then you're actually getting like immersed in a culture rather than just kind of staying in your hotel and like doing all these things. So, I mean, if you have the time, it's totally something I'd recommend, because it's cheap and just a really cool experience. So, I mean, I did things like that. I stayed in hostels, which I know is not great for everyone, but there are private rooms in hostels, and they're usually in the best location in the city. There are like ride shares you can buy. You can pay like a local person that's going from one town to another for a seat in their car, and there are ways to definitely make your money spread. And then just making things a priority, knowing what you want to do.
In my solo podcast on self-value, I spoke about something that's been monumental in my personal journey and self-development. It's a program called To Be Magnetic. This is a series of manifestation workshops that are aimed at unblocking limiting beliefs and reprogramming them into beliefs that serve you through hypnosis. The program is rooted in psychology, neuroscience, and the energetic gifts of the program creator, Lacey Phillips. Trust me, it's not scary or woo-woo. We all have beliefs that are looping through our brains at all times of the day, and the workshops just help you identify what beliefs are holding you back so that you can start to change your life for the better. It helps with unblocking, addressing your shadows, increasing your self-worth, and taking you through the groundwork for manifestation. It's very functional and self-paced. It kind of feels like a therapy session, and you get to choose what areas you want to work on. So if you'd like to start taking ownership of your life in a new way and join a growing community of thousands of other manifestors, then here's your chance. Join the Pathway subscription at tobemagnetic.com, which is the monthly subscription service where you can get access to the workshops, such as Unblocked Money, Inner Child, Shadow, and exclusive classes just for Pathway members. If this is something you're interested in, check out the link in the show notes to get $20 off your first month of the Pathway. I can't recommend it enough. Now, let's get back to the episode. So how do you also manage, like, when you were in Italy and staying long-term, do you happen to know Italian, or, like, how do you get by when...
No.
I feel like that's also something I kind of think about when considering the places I want to travel, not knowing the language, and if you really want to get that immersive experience, like you said, how do you get by when you don't know the language of the home country?
Yeah, that's totally valid point. I do know a fair amount of Spanish, like quite a bit, and so luckily that is, there are so many languages that are kind of related, and so luckily in France I could kind of read French a bit. I could kind of read Italian, like enough to kind of get by. As far as speaking, it depends on where you go. A lot of countries, people speak English now. That's just kind of the reality of it. But there are definitely, I went to Turkey and Istanbul itself was fine, but then as soon as I left Istanbul and went out into some of the smaller towns, people didn't understand English at all. And those were some of the tricky situations I was talking about getting yourself out of. Is I had a delayed flight, so then I was getting to the city late and barely caught the last bus, and I'd already had a place I was planning to stay, but just trying to get there was proving so difficult, I almost missed the last bus to it, and then the bus driver didn't know exactly where to drop me, and like things like that, and hardly anyone speaking English. And like the one person who was speaking English on the bus was like, you shouldn't be out after dark by yourself as a woman. Like, that's not helping the situation at all. So I mean, like, it works out, I guess. Like, you kind of learn other ways to communicate. Like, I was able to like look something up on a phone or a phone number and just have, I think you just prepare really well before you go to some of those places. So I always had screenshots of the addresses of the places I was staying. I always had the places I was staying planned out ahead of time, the phone numbers. So I mean, in that situation, I like had the phone number ready. I asked a kind of mimed asking someone for their phone, had them call, had the bus driver talk to the hotel owner, and it all just kind of worked out. But I guess just preparation, and then accepting that you're not always going to connect in the way that you're used to. But one of my favorite stories I have from traveling, though, is was also in Turkey, and there was this woman who didn't speak any English whatsoever, and she just saw me one day come in like so excited about these figs I had found, and like I guess she could just tell from my face that I just thought the figs were so beautiful, was so excited. And she worked at the place I was staying, like washing dishes, cleaning stuff up, but I always washed my own dishes because I felt kind of bad. And after a few days of me washing my, like fighting over who was going to wash my dishes and things like that, a few days later she like brought me a fig and kind of presented it to me as like yeah. And so like, yes, language can be an issue sometimes, but like in that situation we didn't have any commonalities whatsoever, but we still like kind of formed a friendship, right? So I mean, preparation, and then just accepting that there are other ways beyond language to like make a connection with people.
That's true. Well, also if you're staying at places like hostels and like taking public transportation, maybe there's other people who are also traveling around, so it's not like, oh, you're the first person who's ever been there who doesn't speak the language.
Yes, yeah, totally. And like, I know that hostels might not be everyone's thing, but if you're on your own, like you're automatically going to make friends. That's one of the nice things about staying at a hostel, is there's so many people in the same boat as you, and you're just automatically going to meet people and have friends that you can kind of explore the city with too.
Let's go back to something you said earlier about the way someone on the bus had shouted at you, like, you shouldn't be out alone, especially as a woman. Were you concerned before going to Europe, like when you made this big trip? Did you ever think, I can't do this alone? Like, I am a woman, like,
Absolutely.
how safe is this?
Yes, absolutely. And like going back to what we were talking about earlier about like wanting to know that I could like, I was strong and competent and could take care of myself. Like that was one of the things that I wanted to, I guess, get better at. There, like while I was traveling, and I knew that it was going to be something that would probably come up as like being a solo female traveler, that there would probably be instances where, I don't know, uncomfortable circumstances that we're all probably used to as women. Like I don't even have to explain like the things that would probably happen, like just walking down the street or something, right? So that definitely came up, and it was something that I like really intentionally wanted to get stronger at, because I think this is something that's like really common for, you know, young women like us, is like we're taught to be nice, to that we shouldn't be rude, you know, things like that. And so there have been so many times in the past, as I'm sure like every young woman has these stories, like so many times in the past where I've like let situations go farther than I was comfortable with because I didn't want to be rude. Right?
That hits me. Yeah, that hits me really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so like, and I didn't want to be like that anymore. You know, I wanted to be tough. I wanted to learn how to like put my foot down when, you know, I was uncomfortable in a situation. And so it was something that I was totally prepared for, and it was something that like I really intentionally wanted to like learn how to handle better, I guess. So yeah, I mean, and there are definitely places where it was harder. Like Turkey was one of them. Like when he yelled that at me on the bus, it was for, you know, it was for a reason, just like some cultural differences. Like I had instances where after talking to me for like 30 seconds, like men there would like kind of grab onto like the back of my arm, like right above my elbow, and it was like a spot where it was like very, felt like they could like really control me, and I would like, you know, immediately pull back and stuff. And like I got really good at making up like, oh, I've got a friend waiting for me here, or like, you know, or just not putting myself in situations where it wasn't like in a public place. But definitely, I mean, there's so much to that, right? Like we can get better at it, but there's still like, it's kind of dangerous for women to be rude, you know. Even if I wanted to get better at being rude, sometimes it can be dangerous for us to be rude, and that's kind of the reality of things. But.
So it sounds like you just kept that in your mind and like had your guard up, aware that situations like that could come up.
Yeah, I just tried to not put myself in situations where it could happen, and then if it did, if places were more rural or I was walking, like I just had kind of plans for like, you know, just like I knew what I was going to say, or I had like people at the hostel that knew where I was, or like things like that. But I also did get tougher. Like one of my proudest moments ever was like walking down the streets of Amsterdam, and a guy that kept asking me to get a drink over and over and over, and he kept following me, kept trying to like, and because I was in the middle of a street, I was like, okay, I can get away with like telling him off. So I just like stopped and then like stomped my foot, and I was like, you need to respect that I am telling you now. And he like ran off so fast. And I was like, yes. I've done it. I've like achieved being like a badass that can like be rude to someone and tell them off for like not respecting me. It's not actually rude. Like he's the one that wasn't respecting.
Yeah, yeah, he deserved it.
Yeah, but like, you know, we're just trained to like be so quiet about it.
Right. Oh, that's so cool.
Thanks. Yeah, so I definitely like feel in some ways like a bit, I don't know, like I don't want to say harder like than I was when I was younger, but I just like feel stronger, like tougher, like more capable of taking care of myself, which I'm proud of.
Do you think you've kind of brought that back to your everyday life? Like you just, like you don't take that BS from people. You're able to put your foot down, as you said.
Yeah, I think so. I think like once you practice standing up for yourself, then like it's easy to kind of carry it into other situations. And it's not like, you know, it's not a matter of like in your daily life. I'm not really often it's not like those things happen like you know, just in daily life, but like the practice of like standing up for myself has carried into other things. Like, you know, I was filling in for that teacher, for an art teacher last semester, teaching those art classes, and there was like an extra day that I was asked to attend, and it wasn't part of what I was being paid for, and I was like, well, yes, I'll go, but are you going to pay me for it? Because otherwise, like,
yeah.
yeah, you know, and you know, and like they're like, yeah, we'll pay you, you know, and so it's just like something that maybe they didn't really think about before I brought it up. But had I been like, oh no, like I don't want to be like greedy or entitled or like whatever, if I'd done that, then I wouldn't have gotten paid for it. But I was just like, I would just like to know if you're going to pay me for this, and and they did. So it's like, you know, once you kind of learn to like value like sticking up for yourself, you can carry it into other situations too, right? And kind of advocate for yourself. And yeah,
that's so cool. Okay, now I feel inspired to ask, like each time that happens to me, like I never ask if I'm gonna get paid for something. Whenever I know that sounds really terrible. I never ask if like someone's gonna pay me. Like whenever you start a new job and there's gonna be a training or orientation, or like influencer stuff on
on social media. Like, I never asked to get paid for anything. But that sounds cool. Like, all you need to do is just ask, like, hey, just out of curiosity, am I getting paid for this? Or do you pay?
Yeah.
I guess it's not a big deal to ask. It's just, again, like a thing women are kind of...
Yeah, I know. And it's like I said, something I had to like intentionally work on, because we are, you know, brought up to like not like it's just, you don't want to assert yourself. You don't want to say like it's like looked down on to kind of say I'm worth this. Like my time, my creative energy is worth compensation, you know, and so it's, yeah, it's hard to do, but it gets easier. It gets easier the more you do it, and there's never any harm in asking.
Do you think that's related to when you were doing photography?
Totally.
How does photography and then like kind of asking to be paid, did you ever submit your photos to magazines or something where you would want to be compensated? How was that?
Yeah, no, it totally, I guess I've had a lot of practice, because it totally, like when I started, even before I went to university, I was already kind of starting photography on the side, and I was doing weddings and I was doing portraits for people and stuff. And like at first you're, you know, like it's like with your podcast, at first it's just fun and you want to learn how to do it and you want the practice, and like that's fine, great, and that's amazing. But then once you develop a certain set of skills, it's time to start like believing that that set of skills is worth being compensated for. And so it was really hard when I first started with photography, because then I was like getting asked to do more and more weddings and more things like that, and I was like, well, how much is this time worth? Like, I don't know. And like asking for money for it, and especially going back to what we talked to earlier, in an environment where people are getting married really young, may not have budgets, may have friends that can photograph for them. Like, you know, sometimes I would ask for money and people would be like, well, this friend of mine can do it for like this.
Yeah, or people with their phones nowadays. I feel like photography isn't as appreciated because people are like, well, I can take my own photos on if you're going to charge me.
Exactly. And so it was hard. It was kind of like, in some situations I was like, okay, let your family or friend like take the photos for you, you know. And like once I got into university and I was surrounded by like professors who were professional artists and people like that, like they luckily really helped me kind of cultivate that understanding that like no one else was going to stick up for the value of my work if I didn't, right? And so like when I did have artwork and shows and things like that, I would, luckily I had these people to go to where I could say, how much do I charge for a print of this photo? And they'd always like be telling me to price it so much higher than I like felt comfortable with at first, you know. But it was nice to have those kind of mentors and people sticking up for the value of my work and teaching me that like you can't undercut yourself, because it's like, you know, you're the one that's kind of setting the bar of like what your value is. And so if you put yourself down here, then people are going to see your work as being valued at this. Whereas if you say, I know that my work is worth this much, like go with it or not, pay it or not, but this is what like the quality of my work is, then people can choose to or not, but you're setting your worth up there, you know? So yeah, it's been a learning process.
That's great. That's really great advice that anyone can apply to anything that they're working on. Like just use the way you said about skills. They're not given as much credit as they should because skills are everything. And it says something about a person when they learn skills on their own time and develop something. And just, you might not have experience working somewhere like that, really professional stuff, but like if you have the skills, that's everything. And
Oh yeah.
I mention experience because I think like sometimes you might feel like, oh, well, I don't have a title or like some professional job where I should be, you know, maybe charging. But if you have the skills, that there's no shame in charging for the work that you do.
Yeah, I mean, just look at how much like time that you said you've had to pour into like learning how to do a podcast. Like, just people don't see the background, right? They don't see all the time learning like the recording stuff and the editing software and like connecting with people and kind of all the mental energy that you put into what you want your podcast to be, right? Or creating like fluid interviews and how to have like this kind of beneficial conversation. Like, that's all like mental energy that you've poured into creating this, like, so that it's going in the direction that you want it to go. And people don't consider that, right? They just see like the 45-minute podcast or whatever, and they're like, oh, it's like 45 minutes of like talking. But it's not. Like, everything that we do is a culmination of all the time and energy and like mental work that we've put into something, right? Like, it's, you don't just have a conversation about some of the things that we like. Even I've been like, for the last few days, been like, oh, if we talk about like challenges and goals, what do I want to say? Like, how do I prepare myself to like add something to Melanie's podcast, so it's not just gonna be like like chatting. It's like so much mental energy goes into like creating something like this.
Oh, well, I hope it hasn't been too much.
No, well, no, not in like a, no, I just wanted to do like, no, not in a stressful way, but it's just like wanting to like, wanting to meet you where you are and help you with like your vision, right? Because I just understand that it's not just like showing up and recording for 45 minutes. It's like much more than that.
That's really nice. I appreciate that so much. And I think you're looking at it very much from the creative perspective and like respecting the work that you don't see, as you just said. And not everyone does that. I'm not gonna throw shade on anyone else who
No, but I mean, it's something useful to keep in mind, because so much of like our kind of daily life is like this processing of content, right? Like, we're just seeing all this new content. I know you had like a musician on and everything like that, and it's just like, it's important to keep in mind, like, there are still professions that are like very like physical and like kind of like there's definite results like production, things like that, but they're so like, we're moving more and more towards kind of a world where so much content or so much of the thing that's being consumed is from a place of mental creation, right? And skills and things like that. So it's just like important to keep in mind for looking at a variety of things, I think.
That's true. With more and more content being available, it's almost like the supply and demand thing. Like, when something's so available, like it's not worth as much, but it needs, like, we need to maintain that worth for all of the content we're consuming.
Yeah, totally. I agree.
That's a very interesting perspective. I would like to continue to kind of gauge your experience from traveling a little bit more and hear about your favorite places that you've been.
Oh, yeah. So a lot of my favorite places have actually been, I think, places that I didn't know that much about in the first place, which is kind of interesting. Like, maybe it's because we feel like we know so many places now. Again, going back to like how much is like online and this like I don't know, influencer thing. We're like seeing content from all these places, right? So it's like I already feel like I knew what Paris would be like or what London would be like, and I loved them. They're really cool, but the places that I was most blown away by, I guess, were the places that I really didn't know that much about going into it. So like Turkey was really high up on my list of favorite places, just because I didn't know anyone who'd been to like Istanbul or more rural parts of Turkey. I didn't know what the culture was like, really, what the food was like anything like that. And so basically being thrown into something that was completely unknown, it was like all my senses were firing all the time. I was like, I didn't know a place like this existed. And I think it kind of fed into like that little girl that was like longing for like all these things that I didn't really know existed. It was like being thrown into like a movie or a book that was just so foreign, and it was just so different, and I loved it. And same with another favorite place of mine was Budapest in Hungary, because I just didn't know anything about it before I went. So every day was a new surprise, I guess. So yeah, I don't know. There's so many places. And then of course, like Iceland is probably my favorite place in the world, and I love Scandinavia, so Iceland, Norway, and very like green, lush places like that. Like Ireland is one of my favorites. Like Isle of Skye in Scotland, they're my favorite places.
What's your approach when you're at these places? Do you feel like you have an extra sense of presence, or like what are you trying to take in when you go? Like what are the things? Are you like destination oriented, like I want to hit up these sites, or do you just kind of go and want to get an immersive experience and feel like a local on a day, or what's your approach when you travel?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both and kind of depended on the place. I mean, I was really fortunate that like I took like 6 months to go. I mean, I went on other trips too, but like I did have 6 months like straight in Europe. And so I was really fortunate that like you can't really sustain. I naturally want to like see everything and do everything while I'm in a place. Like I will have like the whole checklist and like, oh, I'm here, I can't miss this. But like you can't sustain that level of activity for 6 months. You just like cannot be like that kind of a tourist for 6 months straight. So like I was really lucky that because I had so much time, it kind of like forced me in some situations to like slow down and really kind of immerse myself in a different way. And it was kind of the same like with working on the farm, for example. Like I was only seeing a very small portion of Italy during that time, but it's like I felt like I grasped the culture too. Like so it was kind of a mix, and it depended on where I was going. Like obviously places like Paris and like London, you have these things you have to see while you're there, right? Like kind of the main like museums or the sites, but and maybe that's also why some of the places I mentioned before were my favorites, because I didn't have this list of like must see things there. So I was kind of forced to like feel it out more in like an immersive way and just kind of throw myself into walking around and exploring. And maybe you've unleashed the clue to why those are my favorite places. I've never thought about it that way. But
Wait, I've unleashed what?
I was like, that must be you've like figured out why those places are my favorite, because I actually never thought about it from that perspective. But maybe it was because I went in without the list of like things that I knew I had to see, so I was kind of forced to like experience it from like a place of just kind of wandering and being. I'd never thought about that till this conversation.
Things do feel really good when you don't have expectations for them. And it's really hard when you like plan things out to say like, oh, I'm planning this, but I have no expectations. That's not true.
People always have expectations. Totally. I know, as hard as we try not to, like, that's a really good point. And it's something I never had thought about, but it's true that like there were those places that I went into and I didn't know what to expect, so I didn't expect anything, and then everything automatically hopefully becomes better than what you'd expect, right? Because you just don't have a baseline for what it is. But I mean, if you have the time, my favorite way to travel is that kind of immersing yourself and exploring that way, because those were the best experiences I had for sure. And those are the places that I feel most deeply connected with, right? Like where I have an understanding of like what daily life is or what the people are like and things like that.
If I can also ask, I mean, if you want to talk about this on the podcast, that's okay too. Like I can just cut it out. But if I may ask, I believe you also met your boyfriend while traveling, right?
I did, yes, and you are free to talk about
Yeah.
that. It's totally fine. Yeah. So that was kind of the best surprise of all, and probably why I count Iceland as my like favorite place ever. So that's where that is where we met. I mean, as we talked about like earlier in the podcast, I traveled for the purpose of like finding who I was, or at least being true to who I was, right? Maybe it wasn't necessarily like trying to find out who I was, but almost like being true to the person I knew that I was. And it's really funny, like when I tell this story now about us meeting, because like we met and started hanging out, and it was like kind of too good to be true, and I was like really angry about it because I was like, I'm out here to be by myself and find myself, and like why is this like perfect person intruding on my self-discovery? Like, so I was like kind of like a little bit like upset about it at first. I was like, this is kind of like some universal trick, like I'm out here trying to be by myself. And he just like dropped this person into my lap. But the thing that I think is beautiful about it too is that like it was in the moment where I was being true to myself and going out and doing this thing for myself that I did connect with like someone who I find to be so wonderful for me, right? Because it's like if I hadn't taken those steps or put myself in that place where I was like, okay, I'm going to like do this for me or kind of like honor the person I am, then we wouldn't have connected, right? So it's kind of this like when I, even though I was frustrated at first, it's really, I mean, like the way that things aligned and kind of the steps that I took to put myself in a position to be like where I was is just, it worked out really well.
And how do you feel meeting him? And so this was during that like big 6-month time when you were in Europe, right?
It was a little bit before that, actually. Yeah, it was a trip. It was a separate trip before that time. So for this trip, I had just gone to Iceland for a month. And that's when we met. And then it was about a year later that I went to Europe, actually.
But at this time, you were already split up from your husband, your previous husband, right?
Yeah.
How do you feel like if you were still in this state of like trying to be true to yourself and all that, like, and then kind of thinking about, I guess I'd feel a little hesitant having come out of several years long relationship and then meeting this person in that time when you're like, I'm trying to be like me.
Yeah.
How do you know like it was okay to pursue that?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and that's where like I said a lot of the frustration came from because like I had dated like a little bit, you know, after separating. I you know kind of casually dated, and it's just like after you've been in something that's like so serious, like it sounds so like kind of snobby, but it's like all of those like little dates I was like, oh my god, these are such a waste of time. like I wasn't like I just couldn't connect with anyone. It all seemed so kind of like surface level and like I don't know, like an act or shallow or just like I don't know, after I'd been in something so serious, it was like I just like couldn't connect so casually with people, I guess. And so like that's like some of the frustration was like I did connect with this person right away, right? And I was like, this isn't supposed to be happening. And I guess I can only attribute like it to I don't. That's a good question. I didn't think this would bring up. I mean, like, luckily for me, he was really someone who was capable of like meeting me right where I was, and like I was open with him. Maybe because it was like we were in a completely different country, place, scenario than like normal life. Maybe that's why I was able to like be open with him right away, because it was so removed from my regular life that it's like whatever I say here doesn't really matter. It doesn't impact life at home. And so I was able to like open up right away. I think it was the first day we hung out. I was like, this has been the last couple of years of my life. It's been a mess. It's been like
throwing it all out there on day one.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, yeah. So like, just things happen differently when you're traveling. You're able to connect with people like in a different way, maybe, than you are at home. And so I was open from the very beginning, and I think he was like really able to like meet me where I was and see what I had come through. And he was, I mean, one, really, really supportive and patient. Like, so being like, I see that that's still something that you're gonna be like working through for a while, and it's okay. Also being like really proud and supportive of like how far I'd come too, right? Like he was able to look at the situation and find something to admire in the fact that I'd stepped out and done this for myself. And so I guess being seen by someone that way, and like being given the space to like continue growing the way that I knew I needed to, was kind of what gave me some sense of like ease in knowing that like I could get to know this person while also like taking the time to keep growing in the way that I was hoping to at that time, you know. So mostly his patience and support, I think, was, and like giving myself permission to like, again, about expectations, right? Like I'd expected my trip to look one way, and after the initial anger that it wasn't going to look like how I expected it to, like giving myself permission to alter kind of the vision that I had for that trip, right? Because we ended up spending a majority of our time together when I was supposed to be spending it alone. But like giving myself permission to like let go of kind of the vision I had for that trip, because like something really special had come along, and just recognizing that I would probably regret it more if I didn't see that through than if I like stuck to what my vision of that trip was.
So you spend time in Iceland with him, and then like the trip's coming to a close, and how do you sort of go about that? Are you guys like, well, like this was nice, let's just see what happens? Or he's from Canada, right? So he's gonna go back to Canada, you're going back to Utah. Like, how do you go about those next steps?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of make jokes about it now that we're like on the end of it. We are like having gone through, like now I'm living in Canada. I don't know if we said that in the beginning. Now, like being on this end and having like immigrated to Canada, luckily we went into it very like blissfully unaware of what it could actually look like to try to be like long distance from two different countries, because like he was living in Vancouver at the time, so Salt Lake City to Vancouver is like a one flight, like seems pretty easy, right? So at the beginning it was kind of like, okay, we really 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 like each other, we know that we want to like see each other again, and you know, continue talking and everything. So I think we did leave Iceland knowing that we at least wanted to pursue seeing each other again, continuing to talk every day and getting to know each other. So we kind of just left knowing that we were going to see each other again, and not really knowing much beyond that, I guess. Like we weren't looking all the way down the road, thankfully, because it's a hard process, and I'm glad that we didn't know how difficult it was going to be at the beginning. And then I think, what was it? I went up and saw him in Vancouver for the first time about 2 months after we met. And then he came to Utah. He didn't meet any of my family at the time. He just came like secretly, like, kind of met some friends and like hung out. And then, and then I think I went up to Canada a couple more times, and then went to Europe.
So the European trip, was you by yourself?
Yeah.
Or
no, and like again, it's like I'm so thankful that he was like so supportive of me having to like kind of achieve that, I guess, like that personal growth still, because, you know, for the first year or whatever after we met so much, like all my travel money was going towards flying to Canada to see him, right? And and in that time he moved even farther away. He moved to Yellowknife, which is in the Northwest Territories of Canada, so it's like really far. And so so all my travel time and money was like going to the same spot, and it was something he knew when we met, obviously, that I had been wanting to travel and have these experiences by myself, and it was something that thankfully he was really supportive of, because after knowing each other for almost a year, I was like, look, before I can kind of talk about like pursuing something more like serious or like thinking about what's next for us, like I have this unfinished thing that I was trying to do when we met, and I just don't know that I can like tie myself up into something again or to someone again without honoring this like desire that I've had forever, and since I was a kid. And luckily he was really, really supportive of that. That was probably, those 6 months were probably the hardest thing that we've ever gone through, but it was the trip that kind of showed me that I was ready to like kind of be back in a normal life. I'm doing quotes. I forgot it's a podcast. I'm putting little quotations around my normal life. Um, but that I was kind of ready to like that if I traveled again, I wanted to share it with somebody. Luckily, he was really supportive of me doing that, and I think I achieved like knowing what I wanted at the end of it.
that's really bold. And really, I mean, if you guys were in a relationship at the time, it's really easy for someone to, like, once they're in a relationship, to just want to drag their partner into everything. Like, it's now we do everything.
Mm-hmm.
And you really, like, still wanted to have that self identity and go about the trip that way. I admire that so much.
Thank you. Thanks. It's how the first relationship kind of like self-destructed, right? It was like not honoring the things that we had to do for ourselves and like trying too much to tie ourselves to someone who was like really different. And so I just knew from past experience that I had to be true to who I was, and you know, even when you're in a relationship, you're still two separate people. So I had to be confident in who I was on my own to like know who I was within a relationship, I guess. That makes sense.
Yeah. How do you feel you've taken that little piece of insight and now carried it with you now that you've moved to Canada to be with him? And it's been a couple of years, like 2, 3.
Yeah, yep. I lived here for 2.5 years. Yeah. I mean, the immigration is a long and complicated thing, but I mean, all of that actually did get really thrown into question again, because when I did move here, I wasn't allowed to work for the first like long while, and just as we pursued like my permanent residence status here and everything, and so it was actually really hard because I just had this like kind of trip that showed me I was strong and independent and capable and all of this stuff, and I was like, okay, I'm ready to like pursue, moving forward with somebody, and then I get thrown into a situation where I had to be completely dependent on someone again. So it actually like it all got like thrown into question. Everything I learned I was then facing it again, and I was like, wait, this is exactly what I had like tried to get out of, was feeling like dependent and so like tied to someone else. But I mean, it was just out of necessity. I wasn't allowed to work. I didn't know anyone when I first moved, so it's like I was just kind of thrown into a situation where I'm really dependent on someone. I'm around him all the time, or I was around him all the time, and like his life for that time was my life because I had nothing else. So yeah, it's kind of crazy that you ask how I brought like those things I learned in, because then it's like I automatically got thrown into like a situation that was not independent and was not, but thankfully, because I learned those things about like who I was on my own, I think that is what made it possible to not completely like fall apart during that waiting period, right? Because I knew that my who I was and my kind of like worth or my goals or my dreams, like even if they had to kind of wait for a little bit until I was established here, that they weren't tied up in the situation I was in, right? Because I'd learned so much about like who I was and was confident in who I was able to make the choice to kind of enter this situation where I knew I was going to be like kind of dependent for a while and not feel like I was losing myself, right? Because I knew it was only a period of time, it would all pass, and then I would be independent and exploring my own goals again, which I am now. But it kind of empowered me to like enter this waiting period knowing that it didn't change who I was. And it was all a choice that I was consciously making for like a life that I wanted, which was to kind of start living here in Canada with a partner that I love and kind of build a life here. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know you've also been eagerly awaiting to talk about what your biggest challenge and biggest accomplishment are. So would you care to go into that?
Well, I think I kind of touched on, I didn't call it my biggest challenge earlier, but I kind of touched on it. And then for me, it was redefining success. Like that's been the biggest challenge that I've had. And it's because I grew up so academic. I was on all kinds of scholarships. I got 2 degrees. I was in honors. I was, like all of my successes were tied up on achieving things in school. And so leaving that and not knowing how to be successful like at life or like what success meant in terms of just like living, that was like the biggest challenge that I've faced, is kind of just redefining what success is. Because when you've only known it to be like achievement, and then no one gives you anything to achieve, it's like, wait, how do I know I'm a successful person, or things like that. And I guess I feel accomplished.
Hold on a sec. So what are your merits of success? What do you say, like, whether it be like little things on a daily basis, like the small things that bring you success, or just other outlets that you now seek success in?
Yeah, so I guess the way that I've redefined success for myself, or like, the way that I see being like a successful person is, I don't know, I guess just like owning your life, like living like what makes you happy, being a contributing member in whatever way that is. That doesn't mean you have to be like actively doing things for your community, but just be like, you're not taking away from your community. You're like an active person that is like just owning their life and living their life and not doing harm to other people. It's like I feel success when, I go to a job, whatever that job is, because right now I've worked a lot of different jobs since I graduated from university, but going to a job and knowing that I've done well at it, regardless of whether it's like my long-term career goal or not. And, having my community garden box and giving some of that food back to the community, or helping out, doing trades with other gardeners, like just being in my community, achieving things that make me happy is what success is to me now, if that makes sense. It's not like guidelines or like specific goals that like I feel like I'm checking off, but just being happy, being creative, being a good friend, things like that are what success is to me now.
Those are all valuable, often unacknowledged, small things that really do make an impact.
Yeah, and that's I think how like communities and societies are successful. It's not like everyone is going to be accomplishing these like crazy big like career goals, right? But like the success of a neighborhood or a community is like people like lifting each other up and like being there for each other, being like seeing each other, meeting each other where they are, like offering support. Like that is success. It's not like a personal achievement thing. It's like everyone kind of building each other up.
That's lovely.
Thank you.
So if redefining success is the thing that's been the most challenging, what's been your biggest accomplishment?
Yeah, I guess just stepping into the person I am without feeling like I have to fulfill any of those like preconceived successes, right? Like, you know, stepping out to like go travel for a couple of years instead of maybe pursuing a career goal, right? So for me, that I feel accomplished knowing that I've honored my path, even if it looks a little bit different than what I thought. So my accomplishment and my challenges kind of went hand in hand, because it was a challenge for me to like not feel I was being successful, and my accomplishment is knowing that I am successful in being the person that I wanted to be.
That's really nice. I feel like your challenge and your accomplishment are very related in some ways, and not equating personal success. And as a creator, you've like literally created so much, and like many of the most amazing things are tangible or physical things, and yet it's the personal journey you've been on that seems to be the most accomplishing or self-fulfilling.
Oh yeah, that's the goal, right? Like, I mean, the other things all will go away. You know, like it's you create them, and then you know someone, it's like content is so fleeting now, right? Like those things will go away, but like knowing, you know, after people have listened to your podcast, it's like knowing that you went out and that you did something that you wanted to do, you know, that was calling to you, and that you did it. That feeling that you have for having like honored that desire of yours is going to carry on much longer than people will be listening to podcasts, probably. As much as I hope they keep listening to it. But you know, like it can be both. It can be both. You know, there's the benefits of like the actual thing you've created, and then there's the benefit to you in knowing that you've like pursued a desire, that you had to create this thing, and that's going to stick with you, and it's going to feed into the next thing, and it's going to give you the confidence or the inspiration to keep moving forward. And so like, yeah, the part that you cultivate in yourself and that you like achieve within yourself is so much more than like the physical product that you're creating, right? That's the part that you're going to carry with you.
It feels really nice just thinking about that. So I feel like you have a lot of self-discovery sort of experience yourself. I mean, you seem pretty fearless to me. And I would like you to, if you can, offer a tip or tips to maybe someone who's listening and feels kind of scared to break out their shell or try something new. What would you recommend to them?
Yeah, definitely not fearless. Like, it's definitely like all practice, right? Like, it's like practicing anything. You're going to get better. Like we talked about, like advocating for yourself, asking if you're going to get paid for something, like that gets easier with practice, right? It's not that it's something that is naturally maybe born in people. So I guess the tips that I have are just, as far as like new experiences, like jump first, figure no, not completely true, because I've talked about how I like always tried to prepare things and like be safe, right? But to a certain extent, like you can't guarantee everything, right? Like, and like I met other young women traveling on their own, and we all said the same exact things in the first like few days of traveling. Like I met these girls that, you know, it was their first few days in Europe on their own. All of them were saying the exact same things over and over. They're like, I don't know why I'm doing this. Like I don't need to do this. Like, why am I even here? Kind of thing. And it's like this fear kicking in, right? Because we all had our reasons for leaving our lives and showing up to travel, right? And I did the same thing. I called my mom. My backpack was already checked through to like Romania, and I called her sitting on the floor of an airport in Germany, and I was like, I don't know why I thought I needed to do this. I don't need to I don't need to do this to have any self-discovery. Like, why am I here? Like, if my backpack were already heading to Romania, I would just buy the first ticket home. Like, so it's not about being fearless. It's about remembering why you wanted to do the things you wanted to do and trying to hold on to that, and maybe having someone that can remind you of that, right? Because my mom was like, you have to stick through these feelings, like you were there for a reason. And that's what I tried to tell these other girls, and it was amazing that we all had those exact same words coming out of our mouths. Like it's fear kicking in that makes you forget why you first started pursuing these things that you were pursuing, right? And that fear can really push everything else aside, but you have to keep focused on your why, like what made you want to do it in the first place, and maybe have someone remind you of why you wanted to do it in the first place, even if you can't remember it when the fear is kicking in, right? So that would be my advice, is to not count on not being afraid, because that's not going to happen, but to be able to push past the fear and remember why it's important to you to be doing what you're doing. And eventually you will move past it and you will become more confident in it, but it's not about not being afraid. It's about being able to like sit with that fear and kind of do it anyway, you know? So it's just, you have to jump in and just figure it out. Yeah, so that's the first tip. And then my second tip is kind of going back to like advocating for yourself and things, is like the worst that can happen, the very worst that can happen is that someone can say no. And that's what I've tried to tell myself, because I'll keep it short because I think we're kind of towards the end, but one of my favorite things that I'm most proud of myself for doing is that I contacted a super famous artist who lives in Iceland. His name's Ragnar Kjartansson. That's a hard one. It's like very funny. But I contacted, I wanted to meet him. He was like one of my favorite artists ever, and I was going to be in Iceland. And as scary as that is, because I'm not a world famous artist. He is. Why would he want to hang out with me, right? But I told myself, the worst that can happen is that he just says no. Well, it probably won't say anything, but but the worst that can happen is he'll say no, don't have time, right? But the best thing that could happen is what happened, and the gallery that represents him forwarded my email to him, and his manager was like, oh yeah, come by the gallery when you're in Iceland, that's fine. And so I went and I got to like hang out with him and meet him. We had a drink, listened to records, like talked about art. It was incredible. And if I had been like too scared, if I hadn't thought like, I might as well just see what happens, the worst that can happen is he won't want to hang out with me. If I hadn't just pushed myself into trying and just seeing what would happen, I wouldn't have had that experience. And I'm so proud of myself for that.
Oh my gosh, what a dream.
It was amazing. Yeah, it was pretty amazing. I was pretty awestruck.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. I would like to ask you some closing questions.
Yeah.
So, if you were stranded on a deserted island, what's one thing that you'd want to have with you? And let me also preface this by saying, because I've gotten a lot of questions from previous guests about food. So imagine you didn't have to worry about food on this deserted island, you know? So let's, like, if that kind of helps.
Okay, it does help. Could I, I don't want to like ask clarifying questions. I'm going to maybe cheat a little bit and say I would have like a bookshelf full of books. Right?
Okay.
Instead of trying to pick one book, I'm just going to say I would have a whole lot of books, because then I feel like I would be really entertained for at least a while.
Cool. Okay. All right. Now I definitely have to ask, what's a book that you'd like to recommend to listeners?
My very favorite book that I've read this year, and probably like in a long time, is called The Overstory. It's by Richard Powers, I think. I hope. It's really, it feels especially important because of kind of the environmental issues that we're having right now, but it's mostly about trees, which, yeah, it's a really long book, and you're like, how can that be just about trees? But it follows like all these different storylines and how like connecting to like trees and nature kind of plays out in these different characters' lives, and then they all end up kind of intertwining. But it was like so beautifully written that I cried in multiple places. It made me want to get out in nature and like hug the trees, like protect the trees. Like it's really amazing. It kind of ties together like science, environmentalism, like all kinds of different topics, but focusing on trees. It's really beautiful.
Cool. Okay. What are some routines or habits that make you feel like your best self?
So one of my favorite things that I've been doing for the last couple of years is I run with a running group, and that routine has saved my life in like moving to a new place where I didn't know anyone and couldn't work, because it gave me like motivation to get outside. It gave me people that I was seeing multiple times a week that I could kind of connect with and make friends. So that running routine for me is like one of the best parts of my week, because I get to be social, I get to exercise, I get to be outside, which in the winter here is really hard and important to get outdoors. So yeah, 3 times a week, I run with a running group, and it's one of the best things I do.
Do you happen to know what your sun sign is?
Like zodiac sign? Yeah, I'm an Aries.
Do you know what your rising and moon sign are?
I do not.
Okay. But Aries, that's pretty cool. I was trying to guess in my head because I try and
Were you right?
No, I wasn't. Yeah, I was wrong, but Aries, I like that. That ties in with your go-getter attitude. I feel a lot like once you set your mind to something, like it just goes.
Yeah, stubbornness is what some people call it. Stubbornness can be a good thing.
That's one.
Yeah.
What's one thing that people might not expect that you'd be into?
Gee, I don't know. like that I'm always into, or like
I mean, whatever.
So
or maybe something we didn't really touch on it too much in this episode, but so it's not like a surprise really for anyone who does know you, but like for listeners, because we didn't really touch on it too much, like the whole veganism and environmental aspect, perhaps.
Yeah, that's probably not surprising to people who know me. I've kind of like been a little bit of, I think my friends all called me a hippie in high school. So becoming a pretty adamant vegan and environmentalist is not a surprise.
You were called a hippie in high school? So
I was.
Did you already have those sort of inclinations, like always kind of wondering like what's going on with global warming and like how to reduce paper use and that kind of thing, or what would you?
Yeah, I think maybe it came from like already at a young age having a bit of a global perspective, but like I was always really conscious that we didn't exist within a bubble, and that the things that we did had an impact on the world around us. And so like I've been vegetarian since I was 16. So I already was in high school, and I think that's kind of why I got the hippie thing. And I just I remember researching, like, even then as a teenager, like companies that were either taking advantage of the planet and people or were not, right? So I marched in a parade in high school against like Walmart coming to my small town.
Did you win?
I think no, there's a Walmart. It's hard to win against Walmart. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean that is definitely something that has been kind of playing out in my life for a long time, is just my impact and the impact on the community, I guess, and the world at large. But I did get really into like looking up all the like hiking Everest recently and all the people that have like died doing it. So maybe people don't expect that. That was a weird thing I was into recently.
Do you like looking up like the horror stories, the like weird little stories of things?
Yeah, well, because like I didn't realize that they leave the bodies up there, right? So like as soon as I learned that, I was like, hold up, and I was looking up every single person that has like died on there and like if they're still there. So that might be something that people don't expect, but it was like a week of like Everest obsession. Like going back to your question. something unexpected.
Do you get little spurts where you're like how you said this week you were kind of looking into that, like maybe for a few days you're just really into something like that?
All the time, yeah. All the time. Yeah.
What's the best piece of advice anyone has ever given you?
I can just think of like several instances, and they all just kind of like revolve around the same thing, which is just like to be yourself and value yourself and remember who you are, kind of thing. And I don't know, I guess it's come in different forms from different mentors, like best friends, my professors, my mom, my partner. Like I've been really lucky to have people that have really tried to lift up who I was instead of tamp it down. And so it's just, that's all the advice kind of swirling in my head, is just in different forms from different people, but all kind of the same thing.
I like that. Who is someone that inspires you?
Is it cheesy to say my partner?
No, not at all, but you have to tell us why.
Okay, so the reason that my partner is one of the most inspiring people that I've ever met in my entire life is, we've talked already on this episode about like being a go-getter and accomplishing the things that you say you want to do, and he is like the embodiment of that. So when I met him, he told me that it was his dream to move to this town that we're in now, Yellowknife. He wanted to start a Northern Lights tour company and a bed and breakfast. And I was like, okay, cool, big dreams. Within 6 months of meeting him and him telling me that those were his goals, he packed up and moved from Vancouver to Yellowknife. He bought a place, renovated it to create a bed and breakfast, started his tour company. So that's 2 businesses that he started, and like bought a place, and like he'd lived within the same block in Vancouver his entire life, right? So he like up and moved his entire life across the country, started 2 businesses on his own, and that was within 6 months of me meeting him and him telling me that those were his goals. So
is he also an Aries?
no, he's the other moody one. I think he's a Scorpio. It's really moody around here sometimes.
Well, that's still really cool.
Yeah. I have very valid reasons to find him inspiring. Like, he's like the epitome of go-getter.
That's cool. Being around that sort of energy must, like, it makes you want to do the same, like, to go after things.
Totally. Oh yeah, I never want to sit on my goals. I'm like, this guy can, as soon as he says something's gonna happen, it's basically as good as done. So it definitely inspires me to action. Yeah.
That's lovely. So I don't know if you have an answer for this, but what's next for you?
What's next for me? So yeah, I just got my permanent residence in April, so I can now stay in Canada and work and pretty much do everything. So my next, what I would like for myself is to kind of figure out what, kind of like job-wise, what I want to be doing. Because I've worked in a lot of jobs since graduating. I have degrees in fine arts and psychology. I've worked a lot of different jobs, and I've honestly found all of them kind of enjoyable and fulfilling, like a lot of the jobs that I've worked at. And so it kind of makes it hard to like have one where I feel like this is like my calling. And I'm not setting that expectation on myself, because it's, I think, okay to have different callings throughout life, but I would like to kind of figure out a good fit for me up here as far as like a job, you know. So I'm going to be exploring that more. Being in the classroom last semester was really a great experience, and I'd like to kind of figure out whether I want to pursue that more or go more of like a kind of counselor therapy type of route next. So yeah, some self-exploration to see what's next as far as like a job or a career is what I'd like for myself.
How fun.
Yeah.
And where can people find you online? Like any links on social media, anything like that? Shoot them out.
Yeah. Okay, so my website hasn't been updated in a while, but all of my kind of art projects from the past are on there. That's just www.morgandonovan.com. And I think I must have been one of the first to Instagram, because my Instagram handle is just Morgan Donovan as well.
Yeah, you got lucky with your name.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, just my name. That's where you can find me everywhere.
Beautiful. All right, then. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been so nice to finally talk to you. We should do it again, not recorded.
Yeah, definitely.
And there we have it, the final episode of Season 1 of the Make It Happen podcast. I so loved hearing about Morgan's journey to self-empowerment and learning how to put her foot down for what she believes in. Even just asking for things. Like when she went to Iceland and met up with the artists that she admired. As she said, the worst thing that can happen is someone says no. So it just makes me think, it's better to take a chance than to be the one who says no to yourself by not going through with something that is calling to you. I also feel like there's this mentality that when one person finds success, they need to keep all of their tips and tools of the trade a secret because other people will copy, and then they think it'll be less valuable, whatever information that they have. However, there's also no value anywhere if you keep information to yourself. It's as if you had an idea for a painting and did not want to paint it out of fear that others would try to duplicate that painting. Well, if you don't paint it, the idea pretty much just does not exist, right? I'm pretty positive there was something for everyone in this episode, so definitely share the podcast with a friend who you think might enjoy it. Drop a review on iTunes and let me know what you've liked or what you would like to hear more of from the show. I also love seeing your screenshots on Instagram when you're listening to the episode. It makes my day. I am so thankful for all of you who have been following along and who stuck with me through these episodes. I had some days where I didn't see sunlight and I felt like I wanted to pull my hair out when the audio was being difficult, but I think I've learned better ways and look forward to continuous improvement. I also look forward to more conversations with fascinating people. This break isn't the end, but it is going to give me a chance to regroup, catch some sun, and plan out ideas for future episodes. If there's anything you'd particularly be interested in hearing about, then definitely shoot me a message. I'd love to know. So, yeah, the podcast will be on a hiatus, and I'm not setting a specific date for when it will be back. I'm thinking December, January, but again, I'm not pressuring myself with a date because I think everything will unfold as it should naturally in the most wonderful way. Subscribe so you'll catch the podcast when it returns, and keep your eyes peeled on my Instagram during the meantime. I love you all so much, and I'll see you guys again very soon. Bye!